right, so we have already talked about inductive reasoning, but it is a huge part of what we are doing here in chapter 5. So when we talk about the vocabulary within this particular chapter, we're putting it in the context of science. And I say that because there might be a few vocabulary words that you might just assume you know the answer, and then you use that as your definition, and then it becomes wrong. So use the vocabulary as we use it within class, within this particular discussion, okay? And you'll see as we go through, you'll go, oh, I see why. Kind of like how when we used random before, oftentimes students use that incorrectly when I'm looking for it in a scientific use versus the, a different way in which someone might use the word random or however. But anyway, I just say that so that way, as we move forward, you're paying attention to how I'm using the words. Okay. We are going to be talking about many different things in relation to inductive reasoning, but for the most part, we're going to talk about controlled studies. Okay. So a controlled study uses various specific and reliable methods that that compare groups of subjects. Okay, so just understanding that's kind of I'm going to give you more vocabulary words that's going to help you understand this. But again, a control group is using a very specific, reliable methods that compare groups of subjects. Okay, so the methods that we use, which is going to be, we're going to talk about protocol. The methods should be able to be duplicated to verify accuracy. So the method or the protocol, when that is being done over and over and over again, the results should be the same because of the way it is done using a protocol, right? It's the method in which you do the experiment. And the reason why this is really important, especially with controlled studies, one, it's controlled. Like that means you should be able to keep doing it. It should always have the same response. And if it doesn't, that means the first time you did it was probably anomaly. Or maybe something along, I don't know how, once you do an experiment, you should be able to do it over and over again in a controlled study and have the same response. The reason why I say that is there was a study out there in regards to vaccines, and there was a study that said that vaccines had caused autism, but the problem was when the peers went through to follow the same protocol and do the same methods, they weren't getting the same results. Turns out that the very first experiment that was done was falsified, and the information was not correct. And because of that, it no longer is considered accurate data because, again, when they tried to recreate the study, they weren't getting the same results. So what the original one would have been considered inaccurate. Turned out they did falsify it, so they said, okay, that study no longer is valid and we can't use that anymore. This is why controlled studies are really important, so that, again, we can be consistent and accurate with the information that we give out as we are drawing more conclusions. So, again, this is still very much inductive reasoning because we're trying to figure out what do we want to find out. Remember the characteristic of interest, or as we will call it, the question. Okay, we have a question or a characteristic of interest that we're going to be asking. And then we want to find out, what do I want to find? Who do I want to find out about? And that's going to be our target population. These words sound very familiar. Okay. And then we want to find out who can we study within this target population. Remember, that's the sample size. Okay. The conclusions, they should be the same. And then they should still answer the same 3 questions. Okay. All right. So the same 3 questions being, what I want to find out, who do I want to find out, and who can I study to find out about it? Those are the 3 questions, okay? All right, so protocol and subjects. First of all, the protocol is the design of the controlled research study. And the protocol is the actions and things that you need to do in consistent order, as being given in order to have the same results. That could be the way in which you are giving how do I say this? The way you're giving out the independent variable, which is the actual drug. With the way you're doing that, the way you are setting up, maybe you need to wear gloves and a mask so that you're not contaminating something. Maybe it is the way in which you inject a thing, right? The protocol is the way and the method in which you should do all the different steps in order to get this particular result. It's kind of like a recipe. Like if you are making a certain like bread or something and you're throwing in the wets with the dries and it's, like if you don't follow a certain order, you're going to get different results. And that's really important. So think about the protocol as kind of like the recipe for or the methods of how to do this particular study. Now, the subjects are the people or the animals that are studied to get the information about a target audience or target population. So remember, we have this target population, but we need a sample of it. Well, when we get the sample, the subjects are who we pull from the sample to do the study on. Okay, that's target population. We got to get the subjects that we can do the experiment on to get results. Okay. The ultimate goal of a controlled study is to weed out outside factors that could influence your results. That could be anything. That could be maybe if it's not some kind of influence where it's emotional, physical, where it comes like maybe something falls into your bat or whatever you're trying to make. This is coming out very awkward, but you know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to think of different ways in which you can do experiments. The ones I usually think is the ones that we use where we have subjects, and we'll talk about that in a second. When we're talking about weeding out outside influence, we're trying to avoid things that are going to change what we're trying to do as an influence, whether it is something that gets into what it is we're trying to do or it influences the people. Or the mindset or the drug itself. So how can you weed out as many things as possible that's going to influence what you're trying to do? You're trying to control it. Put everyone in a box and then see what happens when you put them in this box doing different things to them. Okay. The more you weed out, the more that you have control over your protocol, right? The more you can get rid of things, the more you have control over your protocol and how it looks and how the results will come out. Okay. This is why a lot of studies use what we call a control group. This is what I was trying to get to. When we talk about a control group, we're talking about we have all these subjects. We have this subject, these subjects, and these subjects. And there's 3 different categories, but they're all subjects within the same, we're still trying to ask the same questions, still the same characteristic of interest. Like, what do we want to find out about all of these people? The problem is we don't really know what's going to influence them and what's not. So we have to have this control group over here where we're like, okay, we're not going to do anything to these people. We're going to leave them as is. And these are the people who are going to determine whether or not our experimental group or our placebo group, is there actually a change and what does that look like? And we'll talk about why the psychological effects of a placebo versus the experiment versus the control group. Control group here knows nothing's going to happen to them. They already know that. They already have been told, look, you're not getting anything. We just need you here. All right. Then we have our experimental group who will be receiving the independent variable, which is either the drug or the thing. And then we have the placebo group, which gets a thing, but doesn't have any effect to it. So let's dive into that one. Okay. A control group is not exposed to the independent variable while your target sample is. So these people are, but these people aren't. Okay. We have 8 different parts to a good, reliable research project. We have 8 different things. And these 8 different things are going to help us in this control study. So first of all, obviously, we have to ask a question. And when I say question, I'm looking for the characteristic of interest is what I'm looking for there. And that characteristic of interest concerning a target population is the question, right? So what's the question we want to ask? What do we want to know about these subjects? Okay, now the hypothesis based on this characteristic of interest or this question, the hypothesis is what we think or what we speculate might happen, right? What do we speculate might be discovered, about this question on these people based on the protocol that we put forth onto these subjects, okay? So the sample, again, we got that target population, we have a sample, and then we have the subjects that we're pulling from. Of those subjects that we're pulling from, we have a placebo group. And the placebo group, They receive a treatment, but it has no medical effect. It has no effect at all. It's nothing. We say sugar pill, but it's just a thing that they receive that should not actually give them anything. The reason why we do that, if you know you're not getting anything, you're not going to have any mental reaction to it. If you think you're going to be getting something, you might have a mental reaction to it. Mind over matter. Sometimes you get the placebo pill and you're like, oh, I feel so much better. It didn't do anything to you, but your brain thought it did, so you got better. This is why they have placebo groups. Okay. Now we have the experimental group. Now the experimental group is the group that actually gets what we call the independent variable, or the whether it's the pill or the medical treatment, whatever the thing is, that's what the experimental group gets. So in a control, what we're doing is we're looking at this group right here to see what happens to them. Once we see what happens, we take a look at, again, this placebo group and go, okay, I'm seeing either the same, different, like I'm trying to see what's happening. Are we having very similar reactions to those who received the pill versus those who didn't actually receive anything but thought they did? Are they both having a mental reaction, like a sociological reaction to assuming that they're getting something that's going to help them, right? So that's why in our experimental group, we have to have the placebo group that tells us, okay, yes, something is happening, or no, it's not, based on the fact that the placebo group's having the same exact reaction. We don't know. Then we take all this and compare it to the group over here that doesn't have anything going on at all, based on our control group. Okay? All right, so our experimental group gets the independent variable, the thing that should be different than everyone else. And we should see a difference between everyone based on that. We'll see. It's an experiment. We're about to find out. Now we're going to do observations on everyone. We're going to see how everyone starts going about their day and doing their thing. What's happening? We're gathering data. Are there side effects? Is there, are people actually feeling something, or they think they feel something? What's going on? And once we gather all that information, all that data, we can come up to our conclusion, which is our summary of everything we saw. So when we saw that our experimental group was getting the independent variable, we saw what kind of reactions they were getting. Now the placebo group, when they were getting something, what kind of reactions were they getting compared to the control group was getting nothing. Okay, that's how you're getting your conclusion on the data of all this. Okay, now here's the caveat, or the piece to that. When we talk about blind studies, the blind studies are, as a doctor, these guys and these guys, they don't know if they're getting the placebo or if they're getting the actual independent variable. They don't know. That's the blind study. Me as the doctor, I know, so that way I can observe, each of them. But in a double blind study, none of us know. I don't know what I'm giving you. I don't know what I'm giving you. I know nothing. All I know is this is what I'm doing, right? The reason why that is important is because there is, when we talk about the psychological effect of the placebo group getting a pill, they still have an actual emotional mental reaction potentially to getting that. If they don't know whether or not they're getting the independent variable or not, they might have a reaction to it, right? Maybe it's mental, it just is, right? And then we have the experimental group who actually does get it. So as the doctor, maybe I have, and when I'm handing out these drugs, and I know in just a blind study, I know what I'm giving, but they don't, and I'm giving out the medication. Maybe when I'm doing that, I might have a physical reaction or mannerism as I'm handing them out. That could very well influence either group, right? We don't realize it oftentimes that we do this, but this is one of those things. While you may not realize you're having that effect, you could very well. And I'm going to give you a video in just a second, but if it's double blind and I don't know what I'm giving to anybody, that could very easily take away my influence on either of these groups. And that's why a double blind study can be very important, because you're probably going to get the truest response from all participants than if it was just a blind study. Double blind study means I don't know and the subjects don't know what it is they're getting. versus just a blind study where I, as the doctor, know, but the subjects do not. All right, so I'm going to give you a really quick video to see what I mean when I say that there is oftentimes an influence of expectations that can very well happen to subjects.